Tonight, we step back into the cobbled alleyways of Renaissance Italy, where the streets smell faintly of garlic, church incense, and mild public unrest. You're not some noble or scholar tonight. Nope, you're just an average Florentine. You've got worn out sandals, a mouth that misses flavor, and a government that thinks salt is the same as gold. Around you, the city hums with soft candlelight and clinking cups, but beneath the easygoing chatter is a tension simmering like a too-long stew. Because when salt became a tax, it also became a trigger. And you, dear sleeper, have the misfortune of living in the middle of a culinary crisis. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment with your location and the local time. I love seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge home through a narrow Florentine street, past chipped walls with fading frescoes and gossiping shadows. The baker you pass offers no smile, probably because he's been fined 3 times this week for illegal salt. Your stomach growls as you think about your dinner. Lentils, maybe, or a dry crust of bread. Definitely no cheese. Salted cheese is a luxury now. You pause to listen. From the nearby Arno River, the water whispers against stone. Somewhere, a donkey brays indignantly, possibly because it, too, has noticed that salt is now 4 times what it cost last winter. You sigh. This didn't used to be the case. Once upon a tastier time, salt was just salt. A crystal, a condiment, something you didn't think about unless it was stuck in your teeth. But now, in the late 1400s, it's the subject of public arguments, back alley deals, and heated dinner table debates, if people even have salt to season those debates. The Grand Duchy's new salt tax, you learn, wasn't just about raising revenue. It was about asserting control. Florence and her rival cities were locked in a never-ending chess match, and salt, oddly enough, was the queen. Everyone needed it. No one could escape it. You couldn't store food without it. You couldn't cure meats. You couldn't even feed your livestock properly without a pinch in their mash. The government claimed it was about fairness, about maintaining infrastructure, about funding noble fresco commissions that no one asked for. But everyone knew better. This was about who had the power to flavor life and who didn't. The new regulations arrive on parchment pinned to the town notice board, written in impossibly neat Latin that somehow makes the bad news feel even worse. 1 florin for every ounce of salt. Punishment for hoarding. Surveillance of known salt abusers, whatever that means. It's both ridiculous and strangely terrifying. You pass the butcher's shop. Once the air here was thick with salted pork belly and sun-dried sausages, now it smells vaguely like regret. The butcher himself, a usually robust fellow with a belly like a wine cask, gives you a grim nod. He's been cutting smaller portions lately, and not because he wants to. Historians still argue whether the salt tax was driven more by economic desperation or by territorial pride. Some say the Medici rulers needed funds for their increasingly opulent palaces and habits. Others argue it was about controlling the lower classes, whose food, ironically, became both blander and more rebellious. You can't help but laugh softly at the irony. People are revolting, over-seasoning. And yet, the stakes feel real. This isn't just about taste. It's about dignity. About being told that your stew should be dull, your bread should be flat, and your pasta? Well, just wait until we get to that disaster. Tonight, your dinner consists of boiled fava beans with a splash of olive oil that's half rancid. You stare at the bowl, imagining what a pinch of salt might do. You'd even settle for the dregs from the bottom of a fisherman's pouch. As the sky darkens to inky blue and the church bells toll the hour, you lie back on your straw mattress, thinking about how strange it is that something so tiny, so seemingly insignificant, could cause such unrest. Tomorrow, you've heard, there's going to be a public meeting in the market square. Rumor says a group of artisans and cooks plan to protest. Not with swords, but with soup. Oversalted, intentionally, to make a point. It's probably illegal. It's definitely delicious. You smile to yourself. If you're going to live through a revolt, it might as well be one where the weapons are seasoning. You wake up to the sharp clanging of the baker's ladle against an empty flour barrel. Florentine alarm clocks aren't gentle. The air is thick with early morning chill and wood smoke, And as you rub your eyes and step into your stiff boots, the streets already buzz with a quiet resentment. Today, you're not just walking through Florence, you're walking through a city held hostage by salt. The thing is, salt isn't just a food additive in this era. It's currency, it's control, it's empire. Venice, that proud, lagoon-dwelling diva of a city, built a fortune on it, not by making salt, but by controlling its distribution. Through salt pans along the Adriatic, Venetian merchants hoarded, exported, and most importantly, taxed salt with the flair of a corrupt monopoly banker. Genoa naturally tried to do the same, leading to a series of spectacularly petty trade wars, many involving pirates, bribes, and at least one bishop who apparently tried to smuggle salt under his vestments. Historians still debate whether Venice's salt strategy was truly as diabolical as it seems, or whether it simply became convenient scapegoating centuries later. But you know this: when a city-state builds an actual navy to escort salt shipments, it's not just about seasoning anymore. As you cross the Ponte Vecchio, dodging merchants hawking jewelry and suspiciously resold sausages, your thoughts drift to Genoa's strategy. Unlike Venice, Genoa preferred secretive contracts and inland deals. They didn't need flashy ships. They needed quiet control over river routes and mountain passes. A whisper here, a bribe there, and suddenly, an entire town in Umbria couldn't get salt unless Genoa gave the nod. What does this mean for you? It means Florence is stuck in the middle, battling both external monopolies and its own internal greed. To stay competitive, it does what all desperate governments eventually do: invent a tax. And not just a regular tax, a monopolistic state-run distribution salt tax, which, funnily enough, tastes exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. You remember the day it was announced. The town crier didn't even finish the word salt before someone in the crowd threw a stale baguette. It missed, but the symbolism was loud and bready. The Medici family, yes, those velvet-wrapped financiers turned dukes, supported the tax under the pretense of urban improvement. They always say that, don't they? Cobblestone repairs, sewer systems, public fountains sculpted by vaguely sweaty angels, all funded by salt. Meanwhile, the average household couldn't afford to properly season boiled cabbage. Walking past the Palazzo Vecchio, you glance at its stern facade, imagining the council chambers inside. Men in robes sipping wine, arguing over ounces, drawing up new fines. Somewhere in that palatial coldness, someone decided salt should cost more than your boots. It's said Lorenzo de' Medici once threw a lavish dinner with 7 salted courses to prove he could still afford to. It didn't go over well. No one likes being reminded they're poor mid-chew. But it's not just Florence. Across Italy, salt taxes became tools of power and punishment. In Milan, the sforzas taxed by region, forcing farmers to hike for miles just to purchase a permit before buying actual salt. In Naples, the Spanish overlords managed to make salt both mandatory and nearly mythical. You could be arrested for not buying your monthly ration. Imagine that. Fined for being flavorless. Salt's essential nature, its role in preservation, hydration, and survival, meant every class of society felt its absence. You couldn't store meat for winter. You couldn't treat wounds. Soldiers couldn't travel far without it. Merchants couldn't trade easily. And for households like yours, it meant family recipes suddenly tasted like wet laundry. You duck into a narrow alley as a cart rattles by, stacked high with barrels. Not salt, of course, just olives and a few desperate anchovies pretending to be useful. Salt, if it's being transported, is hidden under hay, disguised as animal feed, or snuck in with monks pretending they accidentally salted their communion wafers. You remember overhearing a spice merchant murmur to a friend that a shipment of blessed mineral was coming in from Ferrara. That's code. Everyone knows it. Blessed mineral equals salt. Unblessed mineral is something that'll probably poison you. Still, life goes on. People adapt. Bread recipes shift. Sauces get weirdly sour. Vinegar becomes a friend, and herbs try bless them to carry the burden salt once did. But no one's fooled. Everyone's counting crystals. Every grain is precious. Some even keep it in little fabric pouches tied to their waists, like it's perfume or a sacred relic. You pass a group of children playing with stones, one of them pretending to sell salt to the others with the solemnity of a real merchant. The customer pays with a single feather and a stick shaped vaguely like a coin. Even the pretend economy knows what's valuable now. Later, as the sun leans westward, you climb a hill near the city's edge and look out across the rooftops. Red tiles glowing, church bells tolling, and beyond the city, fields, rivers, old Roman roads, every path once used to bring in salt, now watched, taxed, blocked. And yet, whispers travel, smugglers move, recipes evolve. Pasta might not taste the same anymore, but people still cook it, and sometimes in the quiet hours, you wonder if this salty tyranny can last forever. You wake to whispers. Not dreams, actual whispers. They drift through the cracked shutters like incense from the neighboring tenement, curling into your ears before your eyes are even open. There's a rumor spreading again. Something about a pasta riot in Bologna, and not a small one either. You swing your legs off your straw mattress, feeling the straw poke through the worn linen. The whispers get louder as you shuffle to the window. On the street below, two fishwives are in mid-gossip, their baskets forgotten, hands animated like they're conducting a tiny opera. Threw noodles at the governor's carriage, uncooked. And they say he slipped on them like a fool, you blink. A revolt sparked by pasta? But of course. That's what happens when you try to tax salt and mess with the region's tagliatelle. Bologna doesn't joke about pasta. No one in Italy does, really. Historians still argue whether the so-called Rivolta della Pasta Insipida, the bland pasta revolt, was a true political uprising or more of a dramatic food fight that got wildly out of hand. What's certain is that in the early 1500s, Bologna introduced an additional tariff on salted water, claiming it was technically flavored infrastructure. The people disagreed. You imagine it, a group of furious nanas rolling out wide sheets of egg pasta, not to cook, but to hurl. That's one way to express discontent, through al dente warfare. You pull on your tunic and head out. The city is already buzzing. Salt inspectors, nicknamed White Devils, have been spotted combing through the market, checking fish stalls and grilling spice vendors. They wear stiff vests and carry little wooden sticks they poke into barrels with, as if salt might squeal if found. You remember when your neighbor Gianni got caught with a secret salt stash under his floorboards. The inspector fined him 5 florins and took the salt. Worse yet, they didn't even pretend it was going into evidence. It went straight into the inspector's stew pot that night. Everyone could smell it. Even the pigeon smelled smug. Your stomach growls again. So you wander toward the market, not to buy, but to listen. Eavesdropping is free, and the chatter this morning is rich. They say Venice is hoarding again. Bah, those lagoon rats will drown in their own greed. I heard someone boiled seawater just to salt their risotto. And tasted like sadness. You pause by a spice merchant's stand. He gives you a knowing nod, then slowly opens a hidden drawer beneath his counter. Inside, nestled like jewels, are 3 tiny packets of salt, carefully folded parchment, marked only with a dot of wax. He raises an eyebrow. You buying, or just staring like a confused monk? You sigh. Just admiring your paper. He chuckles. Good. The walls have ears and teeth. The thing is, the salt shortage has created a whole new class of amateur criminals. Grandmothers are running salt rings. Bakers are blending ash into bread to mimic the flavor. Some taverns offer seasoned meals for an upcharge, but no one knows what the seasoning actually is. There's a rumor one cook used powdered oyster shells. Another tried finely ground olive pits. One particularly daring chef used dried sea worms. His tavern burned down mysteriously the next day. No one mourned the loss. You head deeper into the market, and sure enough, there's a scuffle by the well. A woman is yelling about the latest salt patrol, how they took her sack of potatoes because they tasted suspicious. She swears she hasn't seen salt in weeks, but the inspector claims her eyes looked too hydrated. You know the type. Logic softer than overcooked gnocchi. As evening falls, you find yourself in a tavern on the city's edge, where a musician plucks a lute and the wine is watery but warm. The tavern keeper, an old man with eyebrows like sleeping cats, leans in and whispers, You know, back in my day, salt wasn't political. It was just salt. You nod. And pasta was just pasta. He chuckles. Not anymore. Now it's a statement. You eat bland noodles in public? People think you're either broke or loyal to the regime. Can I just be hungry? He shrugs. Not these days. Everything's a flavor war. You eat slowly. Tonight's dish is chickpeas with herbs. No salt, of course, but the cook added lemon peel. A noble attempt. You appreciate the gesture. even as you mourn the missing crystal magic that ties everything together. Back on the street, you hear someone shouting near the city gates. A small crowd is gathered. A man with wild eyes and a tunic that's more whole than cloth is holding up a spoon and chanting something about liberating our taste buds. A few people cheer. Someone throws a fennel bulb in solidarity. It's not much, but it feels honest. You smile as you turn back toward home, your steps soft against the worn stones. A revolution is brewing, sure, but it smells faintly like oregano, and that's oddly comforting. Where you open your shutters to the smell of smoke, not fire, but the kind of sharp, herbal smoke that says someone's cooking something just illegal enough to be interesting. Down in the alley, a street vendor flips a pan full of sizzling flatbread, too aromatic for someone allegedly working with unsalted flour. You squint. Yep, that glint? Salt crystals. Bold move. But you can't stop. Today, you're heading into the archives. The city's dusty, parchment-stuffed underbelly. Because to understand how salt got weaponized into a pasta-triggering force of unrest, you need to sift through the bureaucratic breadcrumbs. You arrive at the Florentine Civic Records Room, what passes for a city hall meets fire hazard. Inside, it's all candle smoke, coughing scribes, and the soft crackle of ancient pages. A clerk begrudgingly hands you a sheaf of tax edicts, grumbling something about treating documents like lovers, not livestock. You nod solemnly, pretending that's helpful. As you flip through the scrolls, you find it, the Salario Ordinatio of 1494. That's the big one. The document that made salt officially taxable at point of sale, point of storage, and, because Florence was feeling particularly greedy that decade, point of digestion. Well, not officially, but the fines for having salt in excess quantities made it feel like you were being taxed with every mouthful. Historians still argue whether this law was passed for financial necessity or sheer Medici micromanagement. Some suggest it was to fund Florence's ongoing wars with Pisa. Others say it was personal. Cosimo de' Medici once lost a salt bid to Venice and allegedly vowed that if I can't have cheap salt, no one will. Petty? Definitely. Plausible? Painfully so. The law also created one of the most feared professions of the era, the Gabellieri del Sale, or salt collectors. These weren't your average tax agents. These were cloaked, clipboard-wielding enforcers who could walk into your kitchen, lift a pot lid, and declare you overseasoned. You read a testimonial from 1502 where a woman claimed a gabellier fined her for suspiciously delicious beans. She cried, the beans cooled, and the official allegedly took them home for further examination. These guys weren't subtle. Outside the archives, the sun shifted, and the market smells different now. Less morning bread, more roasted chestnuts and civic bitterness. You wander toward the old salt depot, now mostly defunct, but still guarded by an old iron gate and the ghost of its former self. The building is squat, imposing, and smells faintly of desperation and anchovy brine. You step inside, and the air is cooler, heavy with the echo of footsteps past. Here, merchants once queued in miserable silence, clutching paperwork, waiting to buy state-approved salt, rationed, measured, and marked with official wax seals that crumbled like your dreams of a properly seasoned soup. In a corner, you spot graffiti scratched into the wall. No flavor without freedom. Crude, but catchy. Someone once tried to organize a boycott, refusing to buy state salt for an entire week. It ended when the ringleader was found selling artisan mineral flakes that turned out to be crushed marble. His customers developed jaw stiffness, and he fled to Siena, never to be seen again. Folk hero? Maybe. Terrible chemist? Absolutely. You lean against a pillar and think, this depot used to control people's diets, their health, even their ability to travel. Soldiers couldn't march without salted rations. Merchants couldn't preserve goods for long voyages. Midwives needed salt to cleanse tools. Priests used it in holy water. It wasn't just a kitchen staple. It was woven into survival and superstition. In fact, some churches began blessing non-salt seasonings to bypass the tax. Rosemary? Sanctified. Dried lemon peel? Deemed divinely fragrant. Parsley? Technically a spiritual garnish. The clergy always find loopholes, don't they? You leave the depot and stroll toward the Arno River, the wind pushing back your cloak. Along the banks, smugglers once tried to bring salt in hidden under sacks of hay or inside hollowed-out loaves of bread. One even trained a mule to carry salt packets inside its saddle lining. The mule reportedly got rich and retired early. Of course, salt wasn't the only thing taxed during this period. Florence also taxed wine, bread, windows, yes, windows, and even beards, depending on length and sheen. But the salt tax stung deepest because it felt personal. It got into your food, your family, your bones. You pause on a bridge and watch the water drift by, wondering how many casks of salt have passed beneath it, legal or not. Probably more than most clerks would dare admit. But it's not just about the salt itself. It's about the absurd machinery built around it. The laws, the punishments, the inspectors, the underground trade, all orbiting something that literally comes from the sea and evaporates on its own if you leave it outside long enough. You chuckle softly to yourself. What a ridiculous hill to build an empire on. But then again, you've never tried eating saltless beans. The next morning, you're greeted by an unexpected sight: banners. Not the festive kind, mind you. These are homemade, draped from windows with phrases like, "Down with dull dough," and "No salt, no peace." Someone has drawn a frowning spaghetti strand on one. It's evocative. It's protest season again, apparently. And you, like a moth to a very sleepy revolution, wander toward the central piazza where voices rise like steam from a pot. A town crier is shouting over the crowd, scroll in hand, cheeks puffed in red. Hear ye, by decree of the Signoria, unlicensed salt possession will now be punishable by confiscation of cookware. A collective gasp. One woman actually clutches her ladle to her chest. You edge through the gathering. The piazza buzzes with frustrated murmurs. This new law hits home. You can tax ingredients, but when you start seizing pots and pans, that's war. At a nearby corner, you catch sight of a group of students, ink-stained fingers, hungry eyes handing out leaflets. One reads, "Salt for all, not just the fat duke's table." Another pamphlet shows a crude cartoon of the tax collector eating prosciutto while peasants chew on boiled parchment. You wonder if that's symbolic or disturbingly accurate. Historians still debate whether this protest movement was spontaneous or quietly encouraged by rival merchant families trying to destabilize the Medici regime. Some suspect the Pazzi had fingers in it. Others claim it was fueled entirely by culinary despair. Either way, the unrest spread faster than a rumor at a wine shop. You watch as a young boy runs by with a bundle of contraband, tiny salt packets hidden inside dried figs. He grins as he slips them into the hands of a toothless baker who grunts his thanks. Street-level solidarity. It's not loud, but it's loyal. Meanwhile, someone starts singing. A soft, steady chant. "Oh, salty night, oh, seasoned stars, where has our flavor gone so far?" It's terrible poetry, but the tune catches. Soon, half the square is humming, a protest song born of pantry trauma. You walk further toward the palazzo where city officials meet. You've heard the council chambers are soundproofed, which seems suspicious. Still, the square below it is packed with bodies and boiling emotions. There's a lone tomato hurled, it misses wildly and splats against a statue of Cicero. Cicero would not be amused. A man beside you mutters, "I hear they eat salted trout daily in there." You raise your brows. "Who's your source?" He shrugs. "My cousin's friend's dog heard it." Reasonable. You spot the governor's guards posted nearby, looking increasingly nervous. One wipes sweat from his brow with a handkerchief that is oddly embroidered with pasta shapes, a family heirloom, perhaps. Then the crowd parts slightly. A nun steps forward. Yes, a nun. Gray robes, stern eyes, flour on her cheek. She raises a cooking spoon like a crusader's sword and begins to speak. "In the name of mercy and marinara, I ask you, how long must we boil without hope?" she bellows. Applause erupts. Someone throws a dried basil sprig in tribute. You're witnessing something special. Not a riot, not quite a revolution, but a uniquely Italian form of rebellion. Culinary civil disobedience. The nun's speech continues, calling for a flavor truce, and the crowd is eating it up, metaphorically and literally. Someone's handing out unsanctioned bread rolls. You edge near a merchant who whispers, "We've got a pasta-making circle tonight, underground." He gestures toward a crumbling wine cellar. "Password is oregano. Don't forget." You nod solemnly. "I would never." Evening comes and the square starts to empty, but the mood has shifted. There's energy now. Not hope exactly, but resistance, coated lightly in olive oil and defiance. Back at home, you light a candle and sit at your chipped wooden table. You pull out a tiny pinch of salt you traded for yesterday, your last bit. You sprinkle it carefully over a bowl of lentils, watching the crystals melt like snowflakes in broth. It tastes perfect, dangerous, like a crime worth committing. As you eat, you hear someone outside humming the protest song again, off-key but committed. You smile. History might forget today's details, but it will never forget the flavor. Awaiting continue. The next morning arrives draped in mist, the kind that softens the edges of buildings and intentions alike. You wake to distant clattering, a wagon perhaps, or maybe just someone dramatically dropping a ladle in protest. It's hard to tell anymore. Florence is tense but theatrically so. You step outside, drawn by the scent of something illicitly delicious. Sure enough, around the corner, an old woman is frying dough over a brazier, her eyes darting side to side. You approach, whispering, "Salted?" She looks you up and down, then gives the tiniest nod. "Just a whisper," she mutters. You bite in. Crispy edges, chewy center, a faint crunch of rebellion. It's perfect. Today you're heading toward the hillside villages outside Florence, where the salt tax has landed particularly badly. Up here, people already live lean, relying on gardens, barter, and occasionally shouting at the clouds for entertainment. But even they aren't immune to government overreach. The village of Malinaccio greets you with quiet suspicion. You pass a donkey wearing what appears to be a protest sash. A man sharpening a hoe nods at you, clearly judging your hands for being too soft. It's fair. You once got a blister from opening a jar too confidently. You sit with a local potter, old hands stained with red clay. She tells you that since the salt laws tightened, people have started burying tiny salt caches in the forest, like squirrel-hoarded treasure. Some even paint over the hiding spots with fake moss. She shows you a small amphora she made with a false bottom. It's ingenious. It's also filled with black pepper, which is a whole other contraband issue. You don't ask questions. Historians still argue whether rural salt hoarding was truly organized or just instinctual, like flavor-based survival programming. Either way, these quiet pockets of culinary resistance formed a salty nervous system pulsing across Tuscany. Further up the hill, you meet a beekeeper who trades honey for smuggled anchovies. He confides that bees hate the smell of salt, but love the people who carry it. They know, he says, tapping his temple. Bees always know. The local priest offers a different perspective. He supports the law, or at least pretends to. During Mass, he delivers sermons like, "Blessed are the bland, for they shall inherit the earth." But afterward, in the back room, he serves salted olives. Spiritual exemption, he winks. Children have gotten into the rebellion too. Some have taken to drawing chalk outlines of loaves, salted and unsalted, on alley walls. One such piece shows a dramatic cartoon showdown between a sad Blenocchi and a triumphant rigatoni wearing a salt crown. The mood here is different from the city's theatrical defiance. It's quieter, more tired, less pasta poetry and more weary pragmatism. People just want to eat, to pickle their vegetables properly, to not be fined for accidentally seasoning broth with emotion. Back at the village tavern, a man tells you the story of the Salt Witch of Casentino, a mysterious figure said to wander the hills, leaving tiny paper packets of salt in windowsills where babies have cried from bland soup. Historians consider her apocryphal. Locals consider her a legend. You consider that she might just be a kindly aunt with good taste. By evening, the villagers gather at the communal oven. It's warm, golden, and smells of rising dough and gentle mutiny. Everyone brings what they have. Some lentils, wild greens, a little cheese. One woman triumphantly produces a tiny flask of salt water from the Arno, boiled down over hours. They cheer. Someone says grace, not for blessings, but in gratitude that flavor, like hope, tends to return when least expected. As you sip a thin stew and watch firelight dance on the old walls, you realize something. This isn't just about salt. It's about being told you can't have the tiniest joys. It's about control. And resistance doesn't always need banners or slogans. Sometimes it's just a pinch of salt passed under a table. You smile. You'll sleep well tonight. By now, word of the pasta revolts has reached the city's upper crust. And no, not the kind with a nice golden cheese topping. The Medici inner circle is getting nervous. You know this because you've begun frequenting a particular wine shop where couriers whisper more than they drink, and the owner pretends not to hear anything so long as no one spills Chianti. One courier, tipsy but talkative, leans in and says, "They're drafting a list. Suspected culinary agitators." He does air quotes, which feels oddly modern for the Renaissance, but you let it slide. Top of the list, he continues. A nun, a boy with fig pockets, and a guy who drew a salt shaker wearing a crown. You nod solemnly. A dangerous crowd. Inside Palazzo Vecchio, meanwhile, there's debate. Not over justice or fairness, don't be silly, but over economics. Salt funds the state, especially its wars and decorative fountains. Some officials are genuinely shocked that people care this much about seasoning. One reportedly said, "Let them eat unsalted gruel," which, while less catchy than cake, earns similar outrage. Historians still debate whether the Medici truly feared an uprising or simply feared looking foolish. Records are fuzzy. A lot of letters from this time suspiciously end in accidentally dropped in canal. You find yourself once again drawn to the piazza. It's become the de facto nerve center of Florence's salty subversion. Today it's quieter. No banners, no chants, just clusters of citizens talking softly, hands cupped around coffee mugs or sacks of flour like conspirators with grocery lists. A man sets up a puppet show. Harmless, right? Except the puppets depict a villainous taxman slipping on olive oil while a noble spaghetti noodle rides in to save the day. Children laugh. Adults pretend not to. One guard chuckles before catching himself and barking, "Move along." You wander into a side alley where an artist has begun painting a mural. It shows a family sitting at a dinner table with only bread and water, and one defiant child sprinkling an imaginary dash of salt with flair. The caption reads, "Il gusto della libertà," the taste of freedom. You feel something stir. Perhaps your stomach, perhaps the faint whiff of revolution. Back in the shop district, you meet a weaver whose family started sewing tiny salt pouches into the hems of cloaks. Fashion meets function, she smiles. You buy one, of course. It's teal. Goes well with your mood. You also hear rumors of a neutral zone, an abbey on the city's edge where food is shared communally and seasoning is tolerated. Some say the monks there boil pasta with such discretion that steam never rises. Others say they invented a silent method of seasoning using coded prayers. You resolve to visit, if only to see this whisper-boiling technique. Later that evening, you slip into a tavern that's kept its head down through the turmoil. No protest songs, no pamphlets, just food, laughter, and suspiciously flavorful stew. You raise an eyebrow. The barkeep shrugs. "Basil is legal," she says, eyes twinkling. "The rest, divine inspiration." Here you overhear something interesting. A new decree is coming. One that would require citizens to register their salt consumption. You picture the scene. A bureaucrat holding a teaspoon, making you recite how many grains you've used this week. It's ridiculous. It's real. People are tired. Not just hungry, but weary of being scolded for enjoying their own meals. The salt tax, once seen as distant policy, now sits at every dinner table. Every bland mouthful is a reminder of control, of what's been taken. You walk home under a sky salted with stars. The streets are quiet tonight, save for a soft flute playing somewhere in the distance, an old folk tune, slow and wistful. Perhaps it's about longing, or maybe it's just the Renaissance version of lo-fi beats. You feel the wind pick up. It smells like bread. Tomorrow, the council votes on the new salt rationing law. You suspect they'll pass it, but you also suspect Florence won't swallow it quietly. The morning arrives stiff and gray, like a bureaucrat's handshake. Today is the vote. Florence's leaders are deciding whether to introduce mandatory salt usage registries, a phrase so painfully dull it could probably be weaponized. You trail the crowds gathering near Palazzo Vecchio, all cautious murmurs and clutched cloaks. Inside, the city's elites sip bitter infusions and wear velvet with the smug comfort of people who haven't boiled their own pasta since 1423. You, of course, are not allowed in. But you're not alone. Dozens of others gather in the square. Traders, weavers, bakers, one man holding a goat in a knit sweater that says less tax, more taste. A runner emerges with a scowl and a scroll. The law has passed. Citizens will now be required to report how much salt they buy, store, and, somehow, intend to use. You picture a tired mother estimating how many pinches she'll sprinkle into tomorrow's lentil soup, and you feel your jaw clench. Not from anger, from incredulity. Historians still argue whether this decree ever truly rolled out in full. Some say it was enforced strictly for 3 months. Others believe it was more of a scare tactic, never meant for actual enforcement. There's even a theory that the entire thing was mistranslated from a wine tax. But what is clear is the effect it had on the people, because something changes in the piazza that day. A woman begins reading from a list. It's long and poetic. Things we have seasoned without permission. It starts small. Radishes, boiled eggs, anchovy pies. But then grows our daughter's wedding stews, our son's first real soup, the broth we shared with neighbors when the plague took half our street. People begin adding their own. The beans I made when my mother was ill. The first meal I cooked for someone I loved. My uncle's famous spicy turnip mash, he always claimed it could summon thunder. You glance around. No one is laughing, but no one is silent either. Something old is stirring beneath the cobbles, behind the frescoes, deep within the buttery heart of Florence. Dissent. You return to your usual haunts. At the spice merchant's stall, everything is temporarily unavailable, but somehow still finds its way into the hands of those who wink just right. You walk past a tailor displaying a new line of robes with embroidered salt shakers in place of crests. In a public fountain, someone's tossed a loaf of dry, unsalted bread. A sign beside it reads, "Florentine cuisine if you get your way." It's soggy. It's powerful. That evening, you attend a clandestine gathering in the cellar of a dye shop. Dozens of people passing around steaming bowls of soup laced with flavor. Not just salt, but garlic, pepper, sage, scandalous amounts of sage. They don't chant. They don't toast rebellion. They just eat. One woman, an apothecary with a dry wit and bright eyes, tells you about ancient Roman salt rations. They called it a salary, she says, because salt was that valuable, and now they tell us we can't be trusted with it? She laughs softly. It's not about salt. It's about autonomy. You leave with a new understanding. Flavor isn't just pleasure. It's identity, memory, resistance. A bland dish is a dish defeated. A seasoned one? That's defiance served warm. As you step into the night, you catch sight of a stencil spray-painted on a wall. It shows a fist, not clenched in anger, but holding a salt cellar delicately as if seasoning the future. You smile, because this, you realize, isn't the end of the story. It's just the first course. The salt laws are now in effect, and Florence is trying its best to pretend everything is normal, which of course only highlights how absolutely not normal things have become. You stroll through the market. It's unusually quiet. Fishmongers hum lullabies instead of shouting deals. Cheese vendors slice slowly, as if time itself has thickened like overcooked polenta. Every few stalls, you spot the subtle signs of resistance. A crusty loaf with a single olive poking out. A soup ladled in silence, but with steam fragrant enough to raise suspicion. One merchant catches your eye and winks before slipping you a bundle wrapped in wax paper. Inside? A single glorious pinch of illegally imported sea salt. Tell no one, he says, except everyone who needs to know. Meanwhile, Florence's ruling council has made itself busy building a salt oversight office, which, true to bureaucratic form, spends its first 3 weeks arguing about uniforms. You hear they're torn between robes with tiny silver spoons or a more militaristic apron with authority. Historians still argue whether this office was ever functional. One camp believes it was simply a fear mechanism, while another swears there's a preserved ledger detailing every grain used by a monk in 1491. That monk, by the way, allegedly invented the idea of seasoning penance. But outside the chamber walls, the culinary underground grows bolder. At night, you attend a secret gathering known only as La Tavola Ombra, the shadow table. It's held in rotating locations, abandoned stables, empty wine cellars, once even beneath the stage of an amateur theater production of Oedipus but funnier. Tonight's gathering is in an olive press, the stones still warm from the day's labor. Long tables stretch under lanterns dimmed with smoked glass. There's no menu, just whatever the smugglers have spirited in. Pickled mushrooms, salty cheeses from Pisa, black bread infused with anchovy oil. You're seated beside a man who claims to be a former tax collector turned soup poet. Flavor is rhythm, he explains. Salt is the pause that makes the taste sing. He recites a haiku about lentils. You clap politely. He nods gravely. Across the table, a young woman teaches others how to test salt purity with just their teeth. If it crunches, it's clean. If it dissolves too fast, you've been sold quartz again. Laughter floats softly between mouthfuls. This, you realize, is revolution via dinner party. No torches, just torches of roasted eggplant. No angry manifestos, just handwritten recipes passed like scripture. In the weeks that follow, salt use doesn't decrease, it simply vanishes from official records. People lie, they underreport. They claim their pets licked the sack clean, a pigeon stole it, the wind blew it away, a ghost sprinkled it to ward off evil. Florentine bureaucracy chokes on its own paperwork. The Salt Oversight Office, unable to verify anything, begins issuing fines for suspicious seasoning behavior. One man is fined for smiling while eating stew. Another is arrested for excessive savoring. You laugh, until your neighbor is questioned for the aroma wafting from her kitchen. The balance is tipping. Every family meal becomes an act of quiet protest. Every salt grain dropped into a boiling pot echoes louder than any speech. You begin keeping a notebook, not of recipes, but of moments. A child sneaking a taste from a forbidden jar, a baker singing while kneading dough, uncaring who hears, an old man whispering to his wine, "My wife used to salt this dish with her tears, and that was fine." Florence is simmering, and you know full well that a simmering pot, if left long enough, will boil over. The first explosion doesn't come from a cannon, it comes from a kitchen. It's a sweltering day in Florence, the kind of day where even the pigeons look like they're considering early retirement. You're walking past a public bakery when you hear it. Not a bang, exactly, but a pop, like a cork launching from a bottle of rebellious Prosecco. Then, shouting, clanging, flour in the air, and the scent of something way too flavorful to be legal. You duck inside just as a woman, baker by day, dissident by night, hoists a bubbling pot and slams it on the counter. "Taste it," she dares the tax inspectors who've come poking. "Tell me it's not worth jail." The inspectors do not taste it. They retreat, muttering about protocol. The crowd, meanwhile, lines up with bowls. This moment sparks what will later be called the salt standoff of San Lorenzo. It spreads like olive oil on parchment. Quiet kitchen protests turn into loud public meals. Side streets host spontaneous pasta parties. People chant things like "no salt, no peace," and "take a grain, give a grain." The ruling council panics. They send out decrees warning that unauthorized flavor enrichment may lead to civic unrest. Historians still argue whether one pamphlet actually suggested chewing raw vegetables to appreciate nature's untouched bounty, or if that was satire by a rogue calligrapher. You're summoned to an emergency neighborhood meeting in the basement of a wool dyer's guild. The ceiling drips, the benches wobble, but the mood? Electric. One older woman stands to speak. Her name is Assunta, and she's lived through floods, plagues, and 3 different types of government. "I have never," she says, "been told I cannot salt my beans." People nod, some weep. One man faints, but he's just dramatically low on blood sugar. The idea takes shape. A march. Peaceful, flavorful, public. The first ever pasta procession. The day of the march dawns like a fresco. Soft clouds, golden light, a breeze that smells faintly of rebellion and oregano. You wear your least flammable tunic and carry a spoon tucked into your belt like a dagger. Citizens spill into the streets, carrying pots and ladles, bowls and flatbreads, all lovingly seasoned. There are banners shaped like noodles, signs that read, "We will not be bland," and one mysterious puppet that looks suspiciously like the salt overseer with a spaghetti wig. You walk with a group of fishmongers who formed a marching band using buckets and soup spoons. They play something between a rhythm and a boil. The council predictably tries to shut it down. They send guards, but the guards are quickly disarmed by complimentary risotto. You watch one soldier drop his pike and mutter, "This is actually amazing." And that's when it hits you. Florence has outflavored its own laws. Even the council's own chefs are now slipping salt into their sauces under the table. Literally. Enforcement grinds to a halt, not from failure, but from fatigue. How do you fight flavor? How do you imprison an aroma? A week later, a temporary suspension of the registry law is announced. No one really celebrates. They just eat. And for once, no one lies about the salt. You'd expect the aftermath to be triumphant. Confetti made of parmesan, perhaps, or a marble statue of a woman triumphantly seasoning gnocchi. But Florence is quieter now. Not sullen, just calm. Like a stew that's been left to settle after a long, satisfying simmer. People still whisper about what happened. They use nicknames. The Great Sprinkle, the Rebellion a la Ragout, or your personal favorite, Pastagate. But the tone has changed. No longer secretive, not quite boastful. Just gentle pride in a city that found its voice through its stomach. You pass bakeries offering freedom bread, generously salted and slightly smug. Restaurants slip liberated lasagna onto their menus. You even spot a cart labeled contraband cucumbers, now legal. One afternoon, you wander to a quieter part of town and find a group of children playing tax inspector versus salt smuggler with laughably bad accents and a sock full of flour. One girl, appointed the inspector, dramatically sniffs the air and declares, "You there! That soup has dreams!" You nearly choke from laughing. The revolution, it seems, has become a bedtime story, and yet the laws aren't fully repealed, just set aside. Florence's leaders, in typical Renaissance fashion, decide to write a new law that replaces the old one with nearly the same words, but this time with discretion and at the council's pleasure. Classic. Historians still argue whether this was an actual political strategy or just bureaucratic face-saving. Some point to letters from lower officials practically begging for clarity. Others claim the repeal was really just the city shrugging and giving up. Still, what matters is this. Salt is back. Unofficially, officially, joyfully back. You stop by Asunta's kitchen one evening. She's stirring something that smells like a poem made of garlic and good decisions. "Sit," she says, handing you a bowl. "This is for remembering." The broth is deep. The seasoning dances. It tastes like stories. "I was afraid once," she confesses, blowing gently on her spoon. "Afraid they'd take this away, and that we'd forget what it meant to make flavor." She gestures around her small, warm space. The herbs hung from beams, the battered old pot that's cooked through 4 popes, and the salt cellar newly refilled. "We didn't march for soup," she says. "We marched for the right to decide how to make soup." Outside, a breeze carries scents from 10 different kitchens. Roast chestnuts, onion jam, the unmistakable whisper of cured pork. It's not loud anymore, but it's everywhere. You wander through the city, noticing the little things. A grandmother teaching her grandson to season beans by listening to the simmer. A tavern where patrons toast not with wine but with broth. A school assignment that reads, "Describe the flavor of courage." There are still problems, of course. This is Renaissance Italy. Someone is always being exiled, painted into a fresco without their consent, or accused of stealing a goat they clearly didn't steal. But now, at least, no one is being fined for flavor. And that is, with the pasta pot cooled and rebellion gently folded back into daily life, Florence settles into something even more powerful than defiance: normalcy. You wake to the usual, bells echoing off stone walls, pigeons absolutely convinced they pay rent, and the smell of something baking with, yes, a wink of salt. Not too much, just enough to whisper, "We remember." By now, the underground gatherings have morphed into full-blown supper clubs. What was once secrecy is now subtle celebration. Invitations arrive tucked inside loaves, scrawled onto dried basil leaves, or once hidden inside a wedge of pecorino. Tonight, you attend one hosted by Florence's most notorious ex-inspector, who now insists everyone call him Chef Enzo. He welcomes you in an apron stitched with the phrase, "No taxes, just tastes." The menu is ridiculous. Salt-cured duck, lemony broths, a tiramisu with a salted caramel layer so sinful it probably needs confession. Halfway through the night, someone stands to propose a toast. To the grains that changed the game. Everyone clinks spoons. Historians still argue whether these suppers were political statements or just post-rebellion leftovers. One school of thought suggests they were acts of cultural repair. Others say it was simply people being Italian about it, turning every struggle into a meal. You leave full, not just in the belly, but in that way where your spine relaxes and the future doesn't seem like a ridiculous idea. Later, walking home through alleyways echoing with the soft clinks of dishes being washed, you realize something else changed. Language. People don't say salt the same way anymore. It's not just a substance, it's a signal. A shared joke. A seasoning with context. A sentence that ends in a knowing smile. A widow passes you with her market basket. "Try this," she says, handing you a crust of her husband's favorite bread. He always salted it too much. Said that way, he'd live longer. You nod, take a bite, and suddenly understand an entire marriage. The city council, meanwhile, has leaned into the absurdity. They commission a series of public murals celebrating culinary harmony. One features a monk offering salt to a passing dog. Another shows a child spoon-feeding a basilisk. A third is just a loaf of bread surrounded by angels, with the Latin caption, "Panem et saltem," bread and at least a little salt. Tourists are confused. Locals pretend they don't love it. Everyone loves it. And just when you think the story's winding down, something curious happens. A small port town to the south, Livorno, starts its own salt movement. Inspired by Florence, they begin publishing recipes with coded critiques of local taxation. To make the dish truly bold, include the ingredients the council forgot to outlaw. Letters arrive asking for guidance. Not from nobles or scholars, but from bakers, brewers, soap makers, and salt picklers. How did Florence do it, they ask. You smile and write back, 1 grain at a time. You blink awake to a street that smells like simmering lentils and political compromise. The pasta revolts are technically over, but in their wake lies something even more powerful, a culture reawakened. You're standing in what used to be a bureaucratic checkpoint, now converted into a soup stand. The tax window has become a serving hatch. The only thing they weigh now? Flour. Your friend Matteo waves you over. He's holding a wooden spoon like a scepter. We're calling it the Republic of Ragu, he jokes. 1 pot, 1 people, slightly overcooked tomatoes. As you slurp the day's stew, salted to perfection with no fear of fines, you overhear a heated debate at the next table. 2 amateur historians argue whether pasta itself may have caused the revolts or was simply a convenient scapegoat. One insists it was the emotional backbone of the protest. The other, a woman in an apron, snorts. It was the only thing left we still trusted. You smile. It's true. When governance fails, garlic doesn't. You stroll past shops offering salt in ornate jars labeled things like Memory Blend, Victory Crystals, and one bold variety simply titled The Good Stuff. Not legal categories, but symbolic ones. Historians still argue whether this post-revolt boom in boutique salt was economic recovery or just collective culinary therapy. What's undeniable, though, is the return of choice. No longer do bakers need to log their grains. No longer does an artisan winemaker have to justify a salted rim on a tasting glass. But there's another change, quieter and more curious. You notice more men, yes, especially men, learning to cook. Not just for utility, but for expression. For centuries, elite male Florentines avoided the kitchen, preferring paintbrushes or political intrigue. Now they're enrolling in pasta-making circles. Rebellious tagliatelle for beginners reads one flyer. Spice without fear reads another. You find a small class tucked into the back room of a candlemaker's shop. The instructor, a retired spice merchant named Lucrezia, teaches them to listen to the dough. She tells you when she's ready. Half the class weeps, either from the emotion or the onions. Even your local tax clerk, Girolamo, remember him, the guy who once fined you for sneezing near a salt cart, has taken up risotto. He still wears his little velvet hat, but now it's dusted with flour instead of self-importance. Turns out, he tells you sheepishly, I prefer stirring to fining. He stirs anti-clockwise. You don't correct him. The greatest change, though, comes from the kitchens themselves. People start passing down recipes again, not just the ingredients, but the stories. This one, a grandmother might whisper, was cooked when your uncle hid salt in a violin. Or, your father made this when the guard let us borrow his pepper for a wedding stew. In one home, you see a recipe scrawled onto a parchment tucked behind a crucifix. In another, it's etched into the bottom of a cooking pot, just in case. The city has gone back to feeding itself, but this time with full awareness of what that truly means. Food isn't just food, it's resistance, it's joy, it's permission to be alive on your own terms. And so you eat with gratitude, with friends, with a pinch more salt than usual, just because you can. The days drift on like lazy clouds over the Arno. Florence, for all its Renaissance bustle and political posturing, has softened. You feel it in the conversations, slower, more curious. In the kitchens, braver. And even in the laws, somewhat bendier, like overcooked spaghetti. But today, something's different. The city is hosting its first ever Festival of Seasoning. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. You arrive at the Piazza della Signoria, which now smells like a bouquet of oregano, had a love affair with a garlic bulb, and then got roasted. Tents line the square. Each one represents a different neighborhood, guild, or semi-legitimate cooking society. There's a table for salt art, sculptures made entirely from table seasoning, another for smell and tell, guess the dish blindfolded, and an experimental kitchen labeled too much is just enough. Matteo's there too, naturally. I submitted my salted fig and sage nochi, he says. Judges called it confrontational. I'm choosing to take that as praise. The festival is lighthearted, but it's not without deeper roots. The first booth you stop at displays salt ledgers from the revolt, fines paid, confiscations recorded, even a sketch of a woman who allegedly hid contraband beneath her bonnet. That woman, according to a handwritten note, is now a judge in the seasoning competition. You lean in to read her recipe. Herbed clarity broth with reluctant carrot. 10 points just for the name. You overhear snippets of memory as you wander. I remember sneaking into the countryside for just a pinch. My father traded a sketch of the Duomo for one salted anchovy. I didn't even like salt, but I liked choosing. Historians still argue whether this festival is a grassroots cultural healing or a conveniently marketable excuse for Florence's food merchants to raise prices. Either way, no one seems too upset. You watch a group of monks judging a salted almond tart. One makes the sign of the cross before tasting. Another cries, "Not from piety, from flavor." Children dash around with little paper crowns reading "Salt Royalty." You spot a priest arguing with a baker over who first reintroduced rosemary into public discourse. You find a quiet bench beside a stall offering therapeutic bread. Kneading encouraged, no purchase required. A woman hands you a loaf, warm and still singing from the oven. "No charge," she says. "Just remember who you are when you eat it." Later, as dusk blankets the square in candlelight and roasted fennel steam, you watch as festival-goers join in a final procession. No torches, just ladles. They sing softly, not a hymn, not quite a drinking song, something like a lullaby for taste. You follow the crowd to the riverbank where someone ladles out broth into small wooden bowls. Everyone gets one. Everyone sips in silence. Then a cheer, not loud, but content. Like a city exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. Florence has not just reclaimed its salt. It has reclaimed its seasoning, its texture, its small joys. And maybe, just maybe, it has remembered how to nourish itself, mouth and memory alike. You awaken on your final morning in Florence with a strange sense of fulfillment, like the closing pages of a novel you didn't realize had an arc until now. Outside, the bells toll in the slow, deliberate rhythm of a city finally unbothered by urgency. No revolution stirs, no conspiracies boil beneath the surface, just bread rising somewhere and windows opening to let in the time-scented air. You wander to the market, but it feels different now. Gone is the lurking fear of oversight and fines. In its place, proud chaos. A cheese vendor sings opera as he slices pecorino. A child offers salt tastings from a crate of tiny glass vials, each one filled with differently flavored or colored salts, lemon, lavender, something called smoked confusion. At a corner stall, you're drawn to a faded parchment nailed to a post. It's a new tax notice, but not what you expect. It reads, "By order of the council, there shall be no further taxation on joy." Underneath, someone has scribbled, "Unless joy comes in barrels. Then we'll talk." You laugh gently and make your way toward a quiet cafe. Girolamo is there again, serving strong coffee and little almond biscuits. His velvet hat is gone. In its place, a chef's kerchief, comically too large, flopping into his eyes every few minutes. He sees you and waves you over. "Sit, friend. I made your favorite. Salted bean soup, the correct amount this time." As you eat, he tells you the council has officially disbanded the Salt Oversight Office. The building's being turned into a culinary library, with a very strict no fines for flavor policy, he adds. And you're not surprised when you find out Matteo's now teaching history through food. His lecture today? Tagliatelle and Taxes, Why Noodles Made Us Rise Up. He's calling the class Boil and Tell. You linger a while longer, watching a group of teenagers attempting their first dough. They argue over technique, ingredients, and whether basil counts as rebellion. One of them says, "My nana used to say, pasta should taste like what you forgive." The others nod solemnly, as if that makes perfect sense. You notice someone has etched a phrase into the stone beneath your bench. Salt was never the enemy, fear was. You close your eyes and take a deep breath. The story isn't just about salt, or pasta, or politics. It's about the things people hold sacred: taste, memory, dignity, and how quietly they rise when trampled too long. And with that, the chapter closes, not with thunder or fanfare, but with a bowl of soup, a sliver of salted almond tart, and the quiet hum of a city that finally remembers how to feed itself in peace. Wind down. The festival lights fade in your memory now, like embers winking out in the gentle breeze. The laughter and flavor, the quarrels and quiet acts of defiance, all of it softens, drifting further into the distance with each slow breath you take. You settle back into yourself, into your space, wherever you are now. Maybe the air around you feels a little warmer, a little more seasoned with contentment. Maybe you hear the faint echo of a wooden spoon stirring a pot or a market bell ringing somewhere just beyond your hearing. The streets of Florence have gone still, but they linger, gently in your imagination. The cobblestones you walked, the kitchens you entered, the recipes passed down in whispers, they stay with you, like stories tucked between dreams. Let your body sink. Let your breath follow its slow, even rhythm. In. No rush. You don't need to hold on to the names or the facts, just the feeling. The warmth of a shared meal. The humor of a misfired rebellion. The peace that comes not from silence, but from a city full of voices learning to harmonize. Somewhere a loaf of bread cools on a windowsill. A spoon clinks gently against the side of a bowl, and a candle flickers, casting soft shadows across a table set for one or two or a whole revolution. You're safe now. The taxes have passed, the pasta is warm, close your eyes and rest.